Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, and today we're going to be talking about extraordinary relationships with an author who's going to be on in a few minutes. Before we get started, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, you'll find some mundane astrology, which applies to all of us, and then I break it out in individual sun signs, as you've heard me say before in the past. I think it's important that you read your rising sign and your sun sign, put the two together. You get an idea what the theme is for the week. It's incredibly accurate. It's very popular. Get great hits on it and great responses to it. So I encourage you to do that. It's free. My website is www.chrisflisher.com. That's FLISHER.com or turningofthewheel.com. And I also have turningofthewheel.tv, where I do a bunch of educational videos and conversations with astrologers, as well as discussing the teachings of astrology and stuff like that. So they're very educational. Those are also free, so I encourage you to do that. Those of you who support me through contributions, I'm very grateful. I can always use them to keep the great wheel turning, as I say. Not required, but it is greatly appreciative, and it does inspire me to do better work all the time. So without further ado, let's get my guest on. Her name is Dianne Lawson, Dianne Lawson. DianneLawson.com is her website. And we're going to be talking today about extraordinary relationships through astrology. So welcome to the show today, Dianne. It's great to have you on.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I've always thought that astrology is the perfect matchmaker in my eyes. I always think of it as, well, if you know what the person's all about, the odds are pretty good. And I always defer primarily to the relationship of the elements, and I'm curious what your take is. I always think of, like, if you got earth to water or earth to earth or air to air or fire to fire or any combination of those, you typically have a vibrant interchange between two people. And I'm just curious what your take is.
Well, I would agree with that. When I was a beginning astrologer, I really thought that was important. And then after I was in it for a while, I thought, well, gosh, we've got to look at everything, and there's so many things to think of, and so I kind of lost track of what you were just talking about. But then as the years evolved, I tend to go back to the basics and tend to agree with what you said. I mean, astrology is very complicated and very complex, but what you said absolutely does have a lot of validity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems as if that there's a certain basic elemental quality, no pun intended, or actually I should say pun is intended there, that binds us together. And we find that when we look at our lives and the people that we are in relationships with, and that can be a wide spectrum of people. It can be our lovers, it can be our partners, it can be our children, it can be our bosses at work, it can be any number of things. We find that those that often the ones that we get along with best are those that we have this natural connection to that just certainly makes sense. And by the same token, we also find those people that we don't get along with are in there as well.
You know what else I would add to that is I really think that when people have a planet or sun and the moon or something strong in their chart, right on top of somebody else's something. It doesn't matter what. As an example, if somebody's sun is in the same degree of the zodiac as somebody else's moon, I think that's just a little magnet. I've seen a lot of people who get married or a lot of family members who have very close conjunctions with planets very close in the same place of the zodiac. And I have demonstrated on many occasions with other astrologers, they would put three people's birth charts out. Two would be family members and one would be a stranger to them. And I could just instantly pick out the people who were related, and primarily because they have conjunctions of of something in one person's chart to the other person's. And I always tell this story. I love this story. It's one of my favorite stories. Is my husband came to me as an astrology client, and the second I saw his chart, I knew I was going to marry him. And one of the reasons was, and some of it had to do with elements like you're talking about, but he had planets or the sun and the moon just right on top of mine. As just one example of many, he has his moon and north node just exactly on top of my Sun, Mercury, and Mars, and these are all within like a 3-degree orb.
Yeah, so that's just instant magnetism there, and it's just great to see that because it's so telling, because there's a certain area there that means you're going to have a certain view of life. And I think relationships are complicated, as we all know, but ultimately I've been in relationships that have been very driven by, I don't know, passion per se, let's say, and have been very, in that regard, but didn't sustain themselves because they didn't have the sort of the overlap that you're talking about. But I think what makes a relationship work, ultimately, the one quality we need to look for is friendship overall, because the friendship will sustain far longer than any physical relationship will.
Right, right. When I see people who come to me, a couple comes to me, and they each want their birth charts done. And when I do people's birth charts, I always throw in a free chart comparison to talk about how well they get along, the compatibilities and the challenges. But when they're coming over and they're all over each other, kissing and hugging and touching and, so smitten and so in love, I know they're usually outer planets. They're usually like sexy Pluto or exciting Uranus.
Right, yeah.
Or Neptunian haze of blissful romantic love. And those are the aspects that are really exciting in the beginning, but they are not the ones that sustain a relationship. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it just fades away. And, there's one thing, the new love is always what we remember through high school and college and stuff like that. It's like that instant spark that's there. But oftentimes, sometimes that's not to say that those relationships do not work. There are those that do work, especially when you have those, those conjunctions that you referred to earlier. But I do think that it also, sometimes there's that quality of instant, puppy dog love, so to speak, that can easily fade. And what you really want, I think, is the intellect to be stimulated, that has a sustainability quality to it that allows it to last for a long, long time. It's that sort of that friendship aspect that I refer to, that commonality, the common thought process. Of course, this is just speaking about astrology. We can also bring it into other areas like, do you share values? Do you share humor? Do you share lifestyle? Those are all important factors when it comes to a relationship.
What I think is the number one factor in relationships, and I think it's actually more important than astrology, it's if the person is able to have a relationship, if the person has evolved and is able to look, at themselves and him or herself, but if they're ethical, if they're reliable, if they're dependable, and I was married to someone once we just had really great astrological connections. But the guy was a narcissist. I mean, he was really abusive, and it didn't matter, no matter what the chart was doing, if each individual was not able to do a relationship. And sometimes it's hard to know because people evolve over time. Who I was at 16 is certainly not who I am now. I've mellowed at age. I've grown up a lot. I do relationships better, and I've learned from my experiences. And so I think we do have to look at other things besides astrology.
But it's a very good place to begin, and many people do that. Come to me, perhaps they come to you too, and say, "Is this the guy who I need to be with?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I hear that a lot. But the thing is that oftentimes, even if the aspects do line up, there are circumstances that people go through that can damage them. Despite however strong the birth chart is, that's not to say that the quality of the individual would not sustain. The astrological aspect will sustain, but it may be tainted or shaded by the person's life experiences, which may have left them, looking at life much differently. So, and that can work both ways. That can be a positive or a negative. So I think that we can be fooled in some ways. Now, we can find aspects that, even sometimes tense aspects, like a Mars-Venus square, I think is very enticing. But that gives that quality of more passion, which is short-lived, than the longer term, say, of a Sun Mercury, which might be, or, which might have that Moon Mercury, which might have the kind of, the longevity, that sort of curiosity which sustains a person, allows you to be together and enjoy conversations and stimulate together. So I think it's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. You said something about people came to you and said, is this one the one? I do a wide variety of astrology, but one of the things I do are horary, and the one question I get more than any other is about, is this one the one? Or what does the universe want to tell me about my relationship with blank? That's the number one question. And when I do birth charts, and when I do birth charts, I always include about relationships because, and I'm assuming most of your listeners know what a birth chart is.
Of course,
is that right?
Of course, yes, of course, yeah. Mm-hmm. Don't you? I'm asking that question to the world. Yes, I'm sure you do.
In case somebody out there doesn't.
Right.
It's a map of the heavens at the moment, the place you were born. And to me, it's kind of guidepost to get you through life. It tells you about, careers and abilities and talents and relationships of all kinds. But I always talk about, when I do people's birth chart, is the birth chart clearly states what you need in relationships, and it tells you what you should be watching out for and kind of red flags you need to be watching out for. And then I also do yearly charts, and that gives really good indications of when you might meet someone. So everything I do practically always astrologically includes something about relationships because it's such a huge part of people's lives. And I wrote the book because I wanted people to get all the help they could because people have difficulty in navigating relationships. And I know from personal experience as well from the experience of being an astrologer since 1973 that if people would pay attention to astrology, their lives would be so much easier, especially in relationships.
Right. Well, they would have that added level of discernment, which would allow them to say, yes, this is a long-standing one, and this is not. This is a one-night stand, for example. I think that that people, and also it comes down to what the individual has in their own personal chart as to how they relate to the other. So it is a twofold thing. It's both who you're looking for and what you are presenting to the other person. That's important. And I think people have misconceptions about what we expect. They idealize the idea of love, and they fall in love quickly, and they are just madly and crazy, which is what you expect to hear in a new relationship. The first year, 2, 3, 4 years, or whatever is typically very, is substantial, and it can withstand that based on the sort of the charge and the physical attraction that we have with each other. But I think it's important that, the longevity thing is what we really want to look for. That's where I think we find that, the longevity. So you want to be able to come home. How oftentimes do you see people or couples in restaurants, perhaps, and now it's even more prevalent, where they're both sitting at the table, but they're both staring at their phones? Now, that doesn't indicate a relationship that is bad per se. I mean, it shows that it's more of a common problem nowadays. I don't think it was a problem 20 years ago, but when you see couples who are not conversing with each other at a table by themselves, even if they live with each other and they've got kids back home, they go out for a Saturday night, say Dateland or whatever, and they don't have a good time together or they don't converse together, there's something dramatically lacking. You need to have that stimulation there, that sort of sense of security that you can always find something to talk about or share a common theme or share something that we can always relate to with the other person. And if that's not there, that's probably an indication of something that's just not working.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Something you said kind of triggered something that I think is important, is we're often attracted to people who are represented by our fifth house.
Right. And,
the fifth house represents love affairs, and it's really fun and entertaining.
It's the fun spot, yeah.
And the minute people get legally married, their relationship immediately jumps to the seventh house of partnerships, mm-hmm. which is more difficult. The fifth house is in a natural trine to the first house, easy, lucky, fortunate. And then the seventh house is opposite the first. You have to have compromise, and I think that I've seen a lot of people who were really happy dating, and then the minute they got married, and I think people need to be very careful to make sure that their fifth house needs and their seventh house needs are met, and that's just really beautifully shown in the birth chart.
Yeah, it certainly is, because what you want is, there's always there's that old phrase that familiarity breeds contempt. And, when you live with somebody for 20, 30 years or whatever, how many years you want to, whatever number you want to pick, that becomes part of the conversation. And there has to be a reckoning of that, because we all get frustrated with people that we live with and are in relationships with. We can't be perfectly matched. You're going to have some friction there. And I would even go so far as to say that a little friction is probably good sometimes, because it allows you to get your ideas aired. A good, healthy argument is not that bad per se, as long as you get your agenda out there and you come to, a happy ending at the end of it. I think those are actually healthy in some ways, because I think it's important to have that forum. But the idea that we have to do this and be able to withstand this for as long as it has to have, as long as it is, requires a mutual approach to what the third entity is, which is the relationship. So I always think of this in terms of mathematics. We have a person A, we have a person B. When you put the two of them together, what you're basically getting is a person C, or an entity C, if you follow my analogy there. Or we can also look at it this way. We have person A, the woman, person B, the man, or whoever we want to ascribe to that. We put them together, and then we have an AB output component versus the C component. And in the C component, you sort of become you're Dick and Jane as a couple, and people see you as Dick and Jane as a couple, and that's how people view you. So that relationship takes on almost its own astrological profile. Whereas you see Dick and Jane becoming A and B together, then they also have their own individuality, and their individuality is expressed. But I often wonder which is better. So do you follow my sort of logic there?
Are you saying no? I'm not.
Okay. Well, let me explain it again. So we have an A person, and it's not this. I'm just using A as an example. Let's say we have. Okay, let me do it this way. We have Dick, who's A. We have Jane, who's B. We put the two together. We have Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Okay, so they become an entity when they're together as a couple. So A plus B equals C, C being the combination of the A and the B together. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is we have A plus B equals AB, which is the combination of the two together. So there's a subtle distinction. The C is a couple, which it takes on its own entity, and it has its own personality, its own distinct qualities. People are different when they are with their spouses than they are perhaps by themselves, which is one of the reasons I always thought that going to company Christmas parties was so awkward, because the person who's at work all week long is far different perhaps than the person that you are married to. And you act differently around them for a lot of reasons. I mean, nothing salacious, but just for a lot of reasons, you're going to act different around them. So that's why I think of those terms. And I think it's best related to the idea of a composite chart, which would be where you combine the two, versus a sort of the synastry chart, where you try to find the commonalities between the two. Does that make sense to you, or am I confusing you completely?
Yes, it does. I don't use composite charts, though, as much as I use synastry.
Right.
I like comparing them, although, both give a lot of good information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do.
One thing you said I thought was interesting, just a little ways back, you talked about frustrations or challenges between the charts, and friction. I'm not sure exactly the words you used, but I think that's really important, because some relationships are so easy if there are all these trines and sextiles, and they get pretty boring.
Yeah, they become apathetic. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I
think one of the main reasons we're in this life and in relationships is to evolve and to grow and to change and to learn. And one of a very good way to do that is through being involved with somebody with challenging aspects, so that you have to make adjustments and learn about yourself and learn about the other person. And I think we need both. I do a lot of picking times for people to get married, and it depends on the birth charts and the individuals what they want, because people want really different things in marriages. And before I do pick out a wedding purchase chart for someone, I ask them individually, what are the 10 top things you want in a marriage? And that by itself is very telling. If one person talks about status and money and cars and travel, and the other person talks about home life and comfort and staying home and what, somebody you watch TV with. I mean, just that exercise is important, but people are so different. I mean, everybody's chart is unique, and people are very different. And I try to get some, you know, you can't get everything perfect, but I kind of like some challenges, because especially people who I think have a lot of mutable in their chart and want a lot of variety and stimulation and a lot going on, they need some kind of activity and some kind of challenge and something to grow on and learn. And so you just don't want wonderful, blissful, well, that's not possible.
No, I think you're right. I think that people idealize that and they look for that in their ideal person, but I think that is unattainable, to be honest. I think that you have rare circumstances where you do have that, you know, if you have famous, we can think of famous like Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman, for example. We have these famous people who have these relationships that just seem to go on, and they're very powerful and strong, and they last forever, and they seem to be, we hold them up as models for what we ourselves want. But I think that the challenges are there because, like you say, but the challenges I also think are worth the effort. This is the other thing. I think that they are worth the effort because what they allow us to do is that, exactly what you mentioned, and I agree with you, is that challenge is necessary. Those squares that are there are meant to, those are our duties to evolve. Those are what we must step into, face down as we evolve and turn and view them through a different set of lenses, so that we have a learning lesson that goes on. That's part of our whole evolutionary process, I think.
Oh, I agree. I think you're absolutely right. So one thing we haven't talked about in terms of relationships, I think it makes a difference in what astrological cycle you're in. I think if you're like in your first Saturn return, it's going to be very, very different. If you're in your second Saturn return in terms of starting a relationship, because I think the first Saturn return is kind of loneliness and hard and work, and it's often a very difficult time. And I think it's a difficult time to start a relationship, but by the time you've gotten to the second Saturn return, I think you've learned a lot and grown a lot, and it actually can give you what you've earned and what you rewarded. And one of the chapters I have in my book, which seems kind of a strange chapter initially to put in a book about extraordinary relationships, is adults' astrological cycles, because adults, just like children, go through pretty predictable cycles based on what's going on astrologically. And it can be very useful to know where you and your partner are in terms of these cycles. I mean, if somebody is going through a transiting Uranus squared natal Uranus and needing a lot of freedom and space, it can be helpful to know that. I mean,
well, exactly, yeah, like a Uranus opposition in particular. That's sort of the 42 years age. That's when we always refer to the great, the sort of the midlife crisis era, if you get married younger, and that can be very jarring. But I also think going through that with someone can be somewhat rewarding, or at least enlightening. And I tend to think of the first Saturn return as, yes, challenging for sure, but I always think of it as a time of the signal for growing up. It's like you finish your college, you got your major career going, you're getting married, you're buying houses, you're having children. I see those as a necessary milestone, all of which I think are important. They're more about the shift from the wandering youth to the settled down individuals, aiming your way towards, sort of that stability of what, we can think of as a traditional relationship.
Right. Well, you make it sound almost nice.
Well, what a Saturn return. I think that we all come to terms at those times. I mean, when I look at my client base, or I look at my own children, and I see how they arrived at their Saturn return and what kind of tasks they took on at that time, they were largely, ultimately good, because they were periods of time where they had to sort of step in. And I'm not the kind of person who thinks of Saturn as a malefic planet or as an enemy. I actually think Saturn is a good planet in our charts, because it sort of forces us to step into our roles whereas we wouldn't otherwise. It's just the opposite of that sort of lethargic kind of commentary we were talking about earlier. The apathy. This is one that says, pay attention. You're growing up now. You've got to got to put on your big boy pants now.
Right. I just personally, I had a pretty hard first Saturn return. I had a wonderful second Saturn return, and so I'm kind of looking at it through my own eyes. But I've had so many clients going through the first Saturn return, of ages 28 to 30, where it was hard for them to adjust to adult roles. They often felt isolated. They moved and they didn't know anybody, or they had increased responsibilities, or they had children, which kept them homebound from a lot more than they wanted to be. To me, it just often connected to loneliness and separation, and sometimes people are depressed. And
I agree with that. I agree. I think those are all elements of the Saturn return. I would certainly agree with you. But what I would also present is that if they did not have those challenges, would they then find a solution? So I think that because the specter of difficulty or loneliness is there, it then forces us or anybody to then seek out the antidote.
I agree with you. I admire your positive looking at that. But when I was 28, I moved from a place that I was very happy and had a lot of friends and relatives and a job I loved and everything was great. And I moved to Butte, Montana, which was cold. I moved there the first day of summer. It had a snow blizzard, and it was cold, and I didn't know anybody. And then I had two babies, bing, bing, bing. So I was pretty isolated.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, because of that, I had, before I moved there, I had so many friends. I didn't have to do anything. People would invite me, and I just could be lazy and have a really rich social life. And then when I moved to Montana, I didn't know anybody, so I had to be the one who stepped outside of my comfort zone, just example, I started several groups. I asked, I'll give you an example of two of them, but one group I asked 7 couples whom I didn't know very well if they wanted to be in a monthly gourmet group, with
right.
It's really fun. And then I stood up in an American Association of University Women group and said I wanted to start a women's gourmet group, and 22 women signed up, and we had 22 women immediately. But both of those things I would never have done if I had not moved, because I would not have had that need to.
There you go. That's exactly my point. So when you look back at that now in retrospect, you can say, that was a turning point in my life that perhaps I never would have done. I never would have turned that corner had I not been in the circumstances. So for each situation that we are faced with difficulty, it does force us to take stock of where we are and how to resolve the problem. How do we fill that empty void that we're feeling? And then, therefore, we reach out and find how to fill that void in a necessary sort of mentally healthy kind of situation. And we then come back and say, wow, that was difficult at first. And I think it's true for almost everything we look at. In any kind of situation that is difficult, those squares, those challenges, ultimately get us to the right spot. But I think of it like a victory lap, because you're climbing the stairs. This is the 90-degree angle of the stairway. You look at the stairs, there's a 90-degree angle all the way up. Each stair you take an angle. Each stair you take is a challenge, is a square, but eventually you get to the top, and you're at the top, you're at the floor where you want it to be. So there's many ways of looking at this, and I think that, in my 28 years cycle, I lost my father very unexpectedly, so that was a very difficult thing for me to do at that time. And yet, in some ways, I was liberated because of that. 25 years looking back at that time, I can say I was liberated by that experience because I was no longer under his, guise, or so to speak. Fathers can have sort of this, play a significant role in any child that they produce. As how do you outlive how do you do better than your father if your father was a successful person? It presents a challenge. So I think that even though it was difficult at the time, in retrospect, it was a growing opportunity.
I love your analogy of the stairs. I think that's perfect. I wrote that down so I can remember that.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think it's, there's so much about astrology that is, I studied architecture for years, and so I love the fact that the geometry of architecture and the geometry of astrology match together so well, because it's just a natural, harmonic kind of natural, mathematic, universal kind of thing that makes it all work. And that's one of the reasons that I think astrology is so fascinating. It just seems to work in that regard. We're talking today with Dianne Lawson. She's the author of a book called Extraordinary Relationships to Astrology. Her website is DianneLawson.com. That's Dianne with two N's. Lawson, Lawson, DianneLawson.com. And we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll come back and discuss a little bit more about relationships because we all know how much we love relationships. So just hang in there. We'll be right back.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support.
Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My guest today is Dianne Lawson. She's the author of Extraordinary Relationships to Astrology. DianneLawson.com is her website. That's Dianne with two N's. And obviously a D, an I, and A, and two E as well. But anyway, you know what I mean. DianneLawson.com. So we were talking about relationships, and as astrologers, one of the things that we hear a lot of from people is relationships. And people come to us when relationships aren't working right. They come to us when they want a new relationship. They come to us when they want to know if a new relationship is going to be worthwhile or is it the right person for you. And so we run the charts based on the birth date, place, and time, and come up with a situation where we can see what works and what doesn't work. And I'm curious we all have our own little methodologies about how we go through and analyzing a chart. And I'm curious as to what you do if someone comes to you with that question. Like, is this Mr. Right for me? What sort of things are you going to look for? You're going to look for, obviously, those tight orbs between the planets and yourself and the individual, but you're also going to want to see something else. Is there something else that stands out in your little checklist of things to look for?
Well, there are a lot, and everybody's chart is very individual. And I do astrology very different with different people. However, what I like to do always is look at somebody's seventh house and see what sign is on the cusp, what sign is in the house, and what planets are in the house, because that clearly indicates what that person needs in relationship, what they're looking for. And sometimes if it's hard, if they would have some really stressful Mars or Pluto things going on in the seventh house, it might be kind of a warning sign. Guard against, don't get involved with anybody who's controlling, or don't get involved with somebody who might be abusive. And I think that's very important. It gives a huge amount of information. Mm-hmm. It also gives hints, by the way, of how you could meet a partner, through whom or where or how, or clues about the partner so you can more easily find them. And then we talked earlier about we also need our fifth house fun and entertaining kind of needs met. But you can, and I like for when I do couples birth charts, I like for both of them to hear the other, both of their birth charts, so they can each hear what the other person needs. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're very different, and it's often interesting. And one thing I always look for is if one person seems to be really interested in the other person's birth chart, but that favor is not returned.
Right. Well, that could just be how much credence they place in astrology, and that's another whole story altogether, because you've got to go through and try to teach somebody why it works or not. But one thing I've noticed is that I've always thought of astrology as a vehicle for tolerance. And what I mean by that is that when, knowing if we are armed with the knowledge of astrology and we approach a person and we can see that that person is a difficult person, we might be able to approach them differently because we say this person is difficult. So we take that into account. It sort of allows us to set the stage, and it also allows us to, I think, ultimately, it was one of the ultimate tools, reasons for astrology, is that it allows us to be more forgiving of people that we perhaps don't understand, because we can say that this is how they were born. This is sort of their operating instructions. This is their owner's manual. And if they fit into this, and this is the way they operate, it's not their fault they were born when they were born. Now, you can obviously make a decision on that if you decide you want to take on that challenge or not. It depends upon the way you feel about them and what they do for you. And there can often be relationships can be one-sided. I'm not sure that they're always balanced. There's sometimes one person works harder than the other towards the thing, and there's a whole wide variety. But there has to be again, I still come back to that common thread of friendship at the core having to be there, I think.
I'm kind of curious about what you have in your seventh house. I think it may. Do you have anything Aquarius or Uranus there?
My sun is in my seventh house.
Oh, okay. Mine is too.
My sun is in my 12 degrees Aries.
Oh, okay. Because you keep coming back to friendship, and I think that is not as important to everybody as it might be to you.
Perhaps so. Yeah, that's a very good point. But I think that, well, let's put it this way then. If depending upon where the sun is in the chart, I would say that there has to be something in that particular realm of the house that would be appealing to the other person. So it'd be of a particular interest to them. In other words, maybe it's the type of work that they do. If it's their career house, it may be the type of family that they come from. Maybe the way that they are creative. All those may be attractive things to the other person who wants that in someone.
You were talking about how astrology really helps people be tolerant.
Right.
And what I'm going to say next sounds kind of simplistic, but I think it's really profound. Everybody has the same planets. They have the same signs. They have the same houses. Everybody is similar. We have similar needs. But everybody's chart is different. And I can often look at difficult people's charts and sympathize with them. Oh, my gosh, look what the horrible mother he had, or horrible upbringing he had, or the childhood, or the lack of confidence, or and to me, it does help me appreciate and understand people's differences. And I think you're absolutely right about it. It's a great tool for respecting other people's differences and individuality.
Right. The problem is people don't do that. They don't go into the charts to figure that out, and they don't allow that wide berth of tolerance to occur. They sort of get locked in their own way for any number of different reasons. But that's beside the point in some ways, because ultimately, if we could find a way for this to work, and I think ultimately we may get there, people would be able to be astrologically informed to the point where they could say, okay, this is why this person's this way, or this is not why this person's this way. We have to allow them that much. I'm not sure people are prepared for that yet, but it's a nice concept. That's the way I've always thought of it.
Right, I agree. I agree with you.
It's just interesting. But I think the reason I come back to friendship is because I think it's not so much friendship as it is the intellectual compatibility. That's what I really think. That's what I'm saying, is that the intellectual capacity for curiosity or the intellectual capacity for commonality of themes, of ideas, those are all sort of mercurial kind of ideas. You know, it's the way we communicate. It's what curiosity, what piques our imagination. Those things are all things, and of course, then there's of course the way people express love. Some people express love much differently. Some people are openly affectionate and always are, and they're just like a warm Cancer mother, for example, who's just loving and doting all the time. So there's always that quality there too. So it is a mixed bag. I think the friendship sounds a little bit too trite. I don't want it to sound trite. I think what I'm actually looking for is sort of the intellectual compatibility.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you think all people want intellectual compatibility?
No, that's a good question. I don't think that's true. I think that is definitely, that's more of a Gemini kind of person. That's a Libra or an Aquarius, somebody who has that strong air quality. But I think that if you have a friend in your life and your significant other becomes that friend, we often hear people refer to their partners as my best friend. There is something in there that is that. And I'm not sure it has to be intellectual curiosity per se, but there has to be some component of shared interests, I think. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe if you're the Taurus and you're married to the Virgo, you are into taking care of your garden or whatever, or you're with a Scorpio, you have an interest in this wonderful food and dining. I mean, all the attributes that go with that. But I think that there has to be some sort of compatibility that goes over and beyond just physical attraction, I guess is what I really mean.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
Yeah, I don't mean to trivialize it by just saying friendship. Friendship sounds kind of like, oh, you're my best friend, and it's not always that.
Well, and I also think it would be nice to have emotional commonalities, but not every couple does. And what's interesting in my family, and I think my husband that I knew instantly we were going to get married, and I think we have a really strong, good marriage of 22 years. But our moons are square each other, and initially it looks like there's this stressful, emotional. And what's interesting, all of my children married somebody whose moon squares their birth moon.
Oh,
every single one.
Huh.
And the way it manifests between my husband and me is that we do not cook together at all, because if it takes one of us an hour to fix dinner, it'll take both of us an hour to fix dinner, because most of the time we will be standing in each other's way. He will be in front of the stove when I want to be there. He'll be in front of the refrigerator. He's in front of the drawer. There is this not working together well at home. But because I'm an astrologer, I know that in my birth chart, I have my sun squaring my moon, and so for me to have this wonderful moon, his moon on top of my sun, since my birth chart is difficult in relationships, is going to have that his moon squaring my moon. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, I'm willing to not cook with him to have that sun on top of moon conjunction, because it works so well. And the way we have and we don't work well at home. In fact, we have a very, very, very long house, and my office is at one extreme end, catacorner to his, as far away as we can get. But we have a lot of interest, and we love to travel, and we love to be with friends. We're in a lot of groups. We just do a lot of different things outside of the home, and we have a grand time, and it works really well. Mm-hmm. And, just at home, we just know he's going to be in my way. Even any trivial little thing, going laundry. We have this, I'll gather up my clothes and walk one way into the laundry room, and he will have just beat me putting his clothes into the washer. Well, it's as astrology has helped me understand, that's okay. I mean, these are trivial things. Who cares?
They are, but they are the things. These are the little tiny points that can bubble up in a relationship and reach a friction point if you're not careful in diffusing them. So this is a way that I think we can also work with astrology and relationships, as we find out when this is going to be the problem, and then we sort of back away from that. If somebody has a very strong Mars aspect coming up, you're going to watch out. And I've seen, predictively, I said, oh boy, this is going to be a tough day, and without any pre-thought or pre-planning, something did come up as a result of that. And boom, there all of a sudden an argument ensues or a disagreement ensues. And it's like, wow, this was just spot on the money. It did happen this way. And so I think that using astrology in that regard to sort of mitigate those touchy zones is very wise. And I also think it's part of what it means to form a team. A marriage is a team. A partnership is a team of sorts where you have a combined interest and a combined agenda. If you can find the ways to, solve those rough edges or soften those rough edges by avoidance, then that's probably not the worst idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know what I really like to find in compatibilities is if the ascendants are either in the same or compatible, like
Sign.
60,
yeah.
180 degrees, I think is really nice because there's commonalities, and it often leads to common ways of viewing the whole world because the ascendant kind of starts the chart. And if, people who have compatible ascendants will have compatible ways of viewing about health and how to raise kids and family life and relationships and career. And that works really nicely, too.
I think the ascendant can't be overstated because it really does set the tone for the whole personality. It's there, and if there's something flawed in that capacity, I think that there is real danger down the road. And that's one of the things I always recommend as well. I say if the ascendant matches the other person's ascendant either by element or by sign, or by ruling, even by either that or by ruling planet even, or if it matches the sun or the moon of the other person, you often have a very good connection, and it's just right, spot on. Of course, we have the obvious ones of the sun to Venus and stuff like that are also very helpful. But I think that they, knowing all this and going into it with a pre-idea of what's going to be pre-notion of what is to come in the person, can shed a lot. And, I've been in situations, unfortunately, I hate to say that, but where I said, maybe this might not be as long-term relationship as you think, and I don't like to say that because I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but I'd say you might have some challenges here, and sure enough, they do. And they come back and they say, yeah, you were right, Chris, and I don't know what to say at that point. You don't want to dissuade anybody from following their heart if they're madly in love and they found the right person. But if you could explain to them, if we can explain to them in a way that's kind and gentle about the aspects of how they might or might not work, then that would be better.
So you never tell clients to run like hell?
Well, I have said that about, not necessarily about partners, but I've said that about people. One client came to me who said, she was having trouble with her sister. And I said, well, let me see her sister's chart. And I said, oh, my God, no wonder. Run like hell from the sister. I said, this is a difficult person. And I said, I also couched that with a phrase by saying, if you know that this is a difficult person and you enter into that with that as part of your, whatever you want to call it, prejudged view of this person, then you will be able to maybe perhaps tolerate them longer, accept them as they are. Any number of things that go into that. But that's part of it. I think it's true. No, I don't usually tell people to run like hell. I just say, it could be challenging here.
Okay, because I have some long-term clients of many, many years who have been in a history of a lot of horrible, horrible, horrible relationships. Mm-hmm. And they come to me with horror questions, is this one the one? And we've got a really good relationship, and they really trust me. And here they bring somebody else, and the horror just screams to run like hell. I will tell them that. Mm-hmm. Tell them that.
That really is your job. I mean, if people, that's what they're coming to you for. They may not like to hear what they hear, but that is what they're coming to you for.
And it's a difficult because other like new clients come to me and want their birth charts and chart comparison, and I try to be honest, and I also know that no astrologer is going to be 100% accurate, and I know that there are a lot of things I think that are more important than the astrology, like are you going to be loving and accepting and tolerant and ethical and I mean there especially people who were the great generation and before, people were able to tolerate a lot more because they were committed, and a lot more than people today are. And, people who are willing to do the work, are committed, might be able to make a relationship work even though other people may not. And so it's, a lot of it is if you choose to do the work. But sometimes, it's so difficult. I'm kind of wondering how you approach clients that you think they probably don't have much of a chance of lasting.
Well, I think there's a couple of ways to approach that. I mean, I look back to my parents' generation, and they would have never have gotten divorced. They would just hang in there through everything because they came from a different time and place. Their whole context for marriage was different than our context. They grew up in the Depression. Right. They grew up through World War II. All of these things are going on. These were monumental outside world forces that would almost in many ways force you to be with somebody just through sheer survival. And so you'd be with somebody because you knew that together is better than not being together. Together you're stronger than being apart. So you sort of slug it out and you go through all those things and you say, well, this is how it is. And what I say to people, I say, listen, it's going to be difficult. I think you're going to have your challenges here, but look for that silver lining in the challenge. And if you have to find a way to gather more or garner more positive than negative in a relationship in order to do something. And if they can give you something either through a trine or a square, I mean, obviously it would be through a sphere. If they can bring something to you that is difficult and yet enlightening and forward-moving, then that's a valuable person to have in your life because they are the impetus for that.
Right. I also tell people to focus on the positive, just exactly like I was talking about. My husband and I have a challenging aspect, but we've, I realize that's not important, and so we focus on the positive. We, do all the things that we love to do together. Mm-hmm. And there are always going to be positive aspects in a chart. And theoretically, you might be able to get along with everybody,
Well, yeah, I think that's true. There should be that as part of the mixture. I think that what that comes down to is a willingness on any one person's part to be more adaptable. Now that you might find more the immutable sign, obviously, but I think that if we are, this is why I come back to that idea of tolerance. If we are more tolerant and able to accept people as they are for what they are, then we enter into the conversation much differently than if we have our guards up immediately. We can't, that's just common sense. That's just diplomatic protocol. I mean, if you want to get along with somebody, you don't go in and start insulting them, or right. Giving a hard time. You want to have some grease between the wheels there to keep that thing moving. But you're right. I think theoretically we should be able to get along with everybody. There should be some thing somewhere that we would share in common. And I think one good example is the example of what I refer to as foxhole buddies. These are people who are in, and the reason I use foxhole, because you think of yourself, if you're a soldier and you're in war and you're in a foxhole or in a trench, like I think of World War I with the Marianas Trench there, or the Maginot Line, or whatever it was, the All Quiet on the Western Front. When you have that, Marianas Trench is off Japan. I don't know where I got that from, but this is the Maginot Line. Anyway, they were in trenches, and these guys are next to you, and you're going through a difficult thing together. Something about that experience, whether your astrological aspects are off or not, will bring a bond to you because you will have gone through and you will have endured a significant human complexity or hardship together. That is a unifying theme in itself. So that's why.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, that's what I'm saying. So I think that's probably why my parents did tough it out. Plus the fact there was the social stigma of being divorced in the 1920s or 30s that you just didn't go through, or 40s or wherever. There's always that social stigma as well. But I think that, I've been in difficult relationships with people, and yet I've been through difficult experiences with them, which sort of allowed us both to rise above whatever differences or personality traits that were there after, because we said we've been through this together. We've been like being on a team, and sort of winning the World Series or something. You've been through it together.
Part of that, I think, is because of you experience something in common. And one of the things I do besides astrology is I'm an NLP practitioner. I'm a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner. And one of the things that works really well with that is to find commonalities with people. Mm-hmm. When I used to be a social worker, and I was at this workshop once, and we had to find somebody who was sitting by us we didn't know, and we had like 5 minutes to write down all the things we had in common. And it could be anything, like we're both married.
That's a good exercise. I like that, yeah.
Yeah, we're both married. We both have golden retrievers. We're both at this workshop. We're both social workers. We both lived in the same town. And I'm telling you, by the end of that 5 minutes, when I focused only on commonalities and the things we shared in common, I wanted that woman to be my new best friend.
Right, right.
It's amazing, and if you can do that with anybody, focus on what you have in common, and it could be, you could use astrology. Well, we both have our Venuses and Sagittarius, or it could, it could be common stuff in astrology. It could be common interest. It can be common experiences. It really can make a big difference in how relationships go.
You didn't know that person's astrology, though, did you, at the time?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder if you could ever find out that at some point. Probably you can't, but if you could, it'd be interesting to see if there was some connection there, because I'm pretty sure there would be there. But I love the idea of finding that common thread there. It would also be an interesting experiment just to find the opposite of that, to see what was going on that you didn't share in common. Maybe you had different political views, or you had different views about any number of policies or subjects, just for the heck of it, to see if that was as equally.
Yeah, I would have not wanted to sit by her anymore.
Right, I know. Maybe you do the first one first, and I don't know. But it is interesting experiment nonetheless. I think it gives you a good idea. I think it's representative of and indicative of what makes us join together as people, and what makes us come together as individuals into a mutually satisfying relationship between two.
Right, right. Yeah, I agree. I think we share. I think you and I we share a lot of commonalities in how we do charts and how we look at relationships and astrology.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But I think astrology provides the mechanism for that to work. I mean, astrology can be interpreted many ways, as we know, and there's thousands of people doing it all different ways. And my theory has always been that there may be, if you have 10 astrologers in a room and you give them all the same chart, they should come out with some characteristics that are the same all the way through for when they're identifying that person. I've always said that regardless of the type of astrology you use, whether it's Western, whether it's Vedic, whether it's Chinese or Tibetan, whatever, Mayan, you should come up with a common signature of who that person is, I think.
Well, I agree with you, and I think one of the reasons why it works is because I think the planets are the most important part of the chart, the sun, the moon, and the planets. I use Placidus houses. And
I do too.
Western astrologer, and so I use the Western zodiac. But I think the planets have the most power. I think it's interesting that in astrology people differ on the zodiac. They differ on what house system they use, but everybody agrees on what Venus means or what Saturn means.
Right.
And so I think the planets have a lot more power than the others. I think if the others were as important, everybody would agree on them.
Mm-hmm. The planets are what rules. There's no question about it, because the attributes that we ascribe to the planets are universal, regardless of the method that they use to interpret the chart.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valuable piece of it all. And it's interesting. We're running out of time here, but one more quick question for you is the idea of, fixing a broken relationship. Do you think we can do that with astrology? I have some opinions on it. I'm curious what you think. Yeah,
I do. One of the things I do, I don't know if you've ever heard of planetary antidotes.
I don't think I have. No.
Well, this is pretty amazing. Oh gosh, I think back in 1980, I was team teaching astrology classes with a man whose real name was George Moon, and which I thought was interesting. He also happens to be an astro twin of mine, born almost the same day of the same year.
Wow.
So we have a lot of commonalities, and it was fun to teach with him because our planning literally consisted of 10 minutes, or 10 seconds practically. I mean, I don't know. It took no time at all because we thought so much alike and we just knew exactly what we wanted to do and who was going to do what. But he came up with planetary antidotes, and he came up with this. He went through some, I don't know if you heard of C.C. Zane or Albert Benjamin.
I haven't. No, not familiar with him, no.
Okay, anyway, the guy wrote a long time ago in these old books, and I don't know if it's possible to get them anymore, but he wrote about planetary antidotes, and each planet has a planetary antidote. As an example, Saturn rules, depression, among other things, and the planetary antidote for Saturn happens to be, he gets to Venus and Neptune. And so if you're depressed and lonely, a planetary antidote might be Venus, which would be socializing or buying or eating chocolate, or Neptune, which could be prayer, connection to God, walking in solitude, or medicine.
Or going to the movies. I mean, Neptune is movies too. Escapism. Yeah, Mm-hmm.
But anyway, if you have problems in any area of your life, including relationships, you can use the planetary antidote to turn them around. And I have a chapter of that in my book, which I think is just really a powerful way to fix problems in any kind, including relationships. And whether or not people buy my book to read the planetary antidotes, they might want to see if they can find any of the old Albert Benjamin books.
Well, there may be something on the web. If you can Google planetary antidotes, there may be something on that. Who knows? Yeah.
There may not be. The last time I haven't looked for a while, but the last time I looked, I couldn't find anything.
Oh, wow.
And I've not been able to find anything in an easy, coherent way other than my book.
That's good. No, that's good. That's very good.
And
speaking of which, your book is called Extraordinary Relationships to Astrology by Dianne Lawson. Dianne is with 2 N's, and her website is diannelawson.com. So there we go. That takes care of that. People can go find that, and hopefully they will learn what a planetary antidote is, because we could probably all use them at any point in time. And that makes sense to me. Anyway, we've run out of time, as I knew we would. We always have a good chat, and things get going, and then we have to stop. But anyway, again, my guest today has been Dianne Lawson. She's an astrologer and author of Extraordinary Relationships to Astrology. Dianne Lawson is her website, diannelawson.com, with 2 N's. That is in the Dianne, diannelawson.com. And I want to thank you for coming on today. It's great having a conversation. I always love talking about relationships, so if we can do that, we're good.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I had a great time.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that. All right, take care, Dianne.
Okay, you too.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.